So a massive welcome to those of you here watching on the live, or also to those of you watching on replay or catching this as a course a little later. We're here together today for the Freeze to Freedom Masterclass. So I hope you are cozy wherever you are and settled in, and we are going to get started. So a little note, you might like a pen and paper, but you absolutely don't have to have one. I will share all the slides with you afterwards, so don't feel you need to take notes throughout this. It's just more so if you have a little aha moment during this masterclass, I often like to say to jot those down, or just to try to kind of really cement that as a mental note for yourself, because there's quite a lot of information coming up in this masterclass. And like any training that we do, we usually only really take on board about 20%. So it's okay if you don't remember the vast majority of what we cover. Just trust that whatever it is that does stick out for you is what you needed to hear and what you needed to know. And I'm just looking at the chat to see that we have people from Scotland, California, France, and Murchison from all over the world, including New Zealand. So lovely to have you here. All right, so most of you already know who I am because you've come here via Instagram, most likely. So my name is Bex, Rebecca Bella. I'm a qualified counsellor and a mindfulness coach and facilitator. I work in a very kind of eclectic way, mixing together cognitive and somatic practices with a trauma-informed base. A little bit about my journey, and we're not going to go massively into this, but if you might already know this about me, but I've had quite a history of anxiety myself. I've had a couple of moments in my life where I've been in a place of depression, and one of those was during postnatal. And I started having panic attacks when I was in my mid-20s that kind of went on for maybe a few years. And I am in this place now where I can say that I've overcome that. And I guess I'm sharing this so that you know, not so that I would ever say, I know how you're feeling. I know what it feels like to be you right now, because you only know how it feels to be you. But to say that I bring to this work both 13 years of experience working in mental health and doing postgraduate trainings, but also my own personal history of experiencing these things and having to, along the way, discover what it is that worked for me. And so I always share in these programs things that I use with clients in therapy and things that have helped me as well to get my head around the things that I've been through, or to help me come out of these places when I've been in them, and to overcome it. So let's get started. This is what is coming up for us today. As I said, it's quite a lot in today's session. I'm feeling like it's going to be about an hour and a half to 2 hours max. I don't think we'll go quite so long as that. But if you need to head off at any point, please do. Don't feel you have to stay for the whole time. I know we're all living our lives in the background as well. Just know that this will be recorded and sent to you. So we're going to start with understanding the freeze response. And when I say freeze response, we're covering quite a lot when we think about that. So we're covering anything from lacking motivation and procrastination, into depression, into feeling shame, into dissociation. So freeze has got a lot of layers, and we're going to dive into understanding what it is that's happening when we're in a place of freeze. We're going to look at how the freeze response shows up. Now, you probably know how it shows up for you. It's still useful to look at this because often there are elements of it that pop up that we're not even aware are related to our nervous system being in this place. And then we're going to take a little bit more of a cognitive approach and look at some kind of top-down processes, basically what's happening in your brain and what can we do from a brain and thought level. So we're going to look at our thinking, our thought traps, belief blocks, procrastination and motivation. And then we're just sort of dipping our toes into a little smorgasbord of tools that help with those things, as well as what helps with low mood and dissociation. We're going to introduce you to how we use somatic practices with overcoming freeze, and give you a little bit of an idea around how you know what to use and when. And then we're going to have a wee look at some self-sabotage. So along the way, pop questions into the chat if you are confused about something, or you have something that I haven't covered that's popping up for you. Okay, so if you've been to my previous classes, you'll probably be very familiar with my kind of spiel around this. We're going to be now looking at the autonomic nervous system and how it relates to freeze. So we all have an autonomic nervous system, and this system is largely responsible for all of those automatic processes, those things that happen outside of our conscious awareness that keep our body going and that also keep us safe. And so this is things like our heart rate and our digestion and our breathing. And it's also our threat response and our ability to feel safe is all kind of encapsulated within this part of our nervous system. So your autonomic nervous system has two branches. So we've got our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system. And many of us who haven't sort of looked into this part of or polyvagal theory or into the nervous system before have always just understood that, yep, we have our sympathetic and our parasympathetic, and this one's stress and this one is rest, digest, and restore. And that is kind of the extent of what we used to think and believe about how our nervous system functions. But what we know now, and what polyvagal theory has taught us, is it's so much more nuanced than that, and there's other layers involved. So sympathetic nervous system, you may have heard of as your fight or flight system. It's really what it is activation and mobilization. So sympathetic nervous system is not a bad thing. It's not a good thing if we're living in a really dominant sympathetic nervous system state. That's very taxing for our body, for our mind. But we actually do want levels of sympathetic activation in our day. It's really normal to have it. So fight or flight lives there. This is where if you feel angry, if you feel anxious and panicky, then you're in your sympathetic nervous system. Our parasympathetic nervous system itself has these two branches. So it has the ventral vagal, which you may have also heard referred to as your vagal brake. And this is kind of where our vagus nerve is that we hear so much about as well. Ventral vagal is your social engagement branch and system. This is the place where we feel calm and connected. We feel creative. We can feel a sense of joy. It's a place where we rest well, we sleep well, we digest our food. And so this is the place where we want to be able to be in as often as possible in our ventral vagal. And then the other branch is dorsal vagal. And this is our oldest and most primitive threat response. And this is freeze. So dorsal vagal is sort of more of a shutdown and also responsible for kind of immobilization. And we'll explore more about this, but freeze is where depression lives and dissociation and shame. And so it's much more of a dampening or a hypo-aroused state. So these things exist to keep us safe and thriving as a species, as a human, right? And so anytime you face something that is a stressor or a threat, your nervous system is going to respond by going into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So fawn is our please and appease kind of people-pleasing place. And these are all stress, threat, and trauma responses that happen outside of conscious choosing and awareness. So if you're someone who feels like you're in either sympathetic, you're in that kind of anxious, stressed, go, go, go kind of feeling of your system being really jacked up and hyper aroused, or if you're here and you're in that freeze place, just know this isn't something that you've done wrong or is a weakness about you that you're in this place. It's actually really normal that our nervous system fluctuates into different states during our lives and during our day-to-day, but this does happen outside of our conscious choosing. This is about the system keeping us safe from threat. So this is evolutionary. So if there was a tiger that came into, the room right now, so this is back to our caveman days when there were saber-toothed tigers, we would have to automatically respond by either thinking, right, I'm going to run, see if I can get away from this thing, or I'm going to fight, which probably wasn't a super smart idea in terms of it being a saber-toothed tiger. Or if we thought, right, it's too close, I can't run, I can't fight, the threat is too huge for me, the system would go into freeze. And so you see this in a lot of animals whose nervous systems resort to freeze as well. So the story that I give around this is my cat Toast brought in a mouse the other day. Initially, the mouse was in its sympathetic nervous system. It was trying to run away and trying to, flee and find somewhere to hide. So it was in that flight mode. Once Toast had caught it, its system switched it into dorsal vagal. And so this is where you see animals who play dead. They're not actually playing, they've got no control over it, but the body completely flops. And so some of us experience this too, this total immobility and flopping when we go into freeze. The idea being that once the height of the threat has passed, so maybe the cat gets bored, or maybe, as was the case, I intervened, slowly the mouse's system came back into fight or flight mode, so it was ready to get out of there again. Once it got to safety, its system would have slowly brought it back to ventral vagal. So this system operates like a car. So our gas pedal, so getting us moving and mobilized, is our sympathetic nervous system. That's what happens when we put on the gas pedal. Our brake, our foot brake pedal, is like our ventral vagal or the vagal brake. So this is what we do when we've been really stressed, we've been mobilized, and we just start pumping the brakes to bring things back down to calm, bring things back into a place where the body's functioning well and a place where we can connect with others. That's the brake of the car. Our freeze mode is like ripping up the handbrake or the emergency brake, the park brake, whatever you call it, where you are. So that's a much less regulated system. We can't sort of slowly bring ourselves down in a really calm way to a stop. We're kind of screeching to a halt as an emergency. So that's what freeze is. So we can have mixed freeze states, and that's what we're going to go and have a look at now, is all the different kind of layers that there is to freeze. So this little diagram that you see here is a polyvagal curve, and just explains this system again. So down the bottom there's your ventral vagal, your social engagement. We know what that feels like. We feel compassion in this place. We can feel joy. We feel like we're in the present moment as well. Do you notice about when you are stressed, you're not really in the present. You're always out here in the future in your mind. So ventral vagal is about, we can be present. We can be grounded. We can be curious. You'll see it says there it's orientation or oriented to the environment. So that's what happens where we're actually just able to be where we are. We're kind of looking around. Our eyes are looking for people because we're connecting to people. So you might relate to this and thinking, when you're really frozen, we're not oriented to the environment. We are quite slumped. We're often looking at a phone, scrolling. We're not making eye contact as easily. We might sort of withdraw from socializing. And then as our arousal increases, or our level of stress or threat increases, we come up into that sympathetic, that's that middle section there, which is the flight fight. So one's movement away, that's our panic and our fear and withdrawal and avoidance and anxiety. And fight is movement toward. So this is where we feel rage and anger and irritation and frustration. And so we're going toward the threat, the thing that we feel threatened by. And yes, that used to be a tiger. Today, that could be a work situation that we're in. It could be a partner that's triggered us. So our stresses, our threats that we still respond in these same ways to are very different. And then if our level of stress peaks way too fast, too quickly, like it did for the mouse, then we might go into freeze. We might also go into freeze if we've been in a prolonged period of sympathetic nervous system activation. So if we've been chronically stressed or anxious, we will eventually probably flop into a state of freeze. So this is dorsal vagal at the top there. This is body collapse, immobility, depression, shame, shutdown, detachment. So we're going to explore these little states a little bit more into understanding these different layers. And just as we go through, just be thinking a little bit about yourself and your own experience right now, or if you're here because you're learning about this for someone else, just have this person in mind and consider which of these places kind of resonates with you, and it could be a mixture too. So reflexive freeze is talking about when our nervous system reflexively, that is automatically, habitually, but not with choosing, goes into a state of freeze. So freezing is a protective output of our nervous system, right? So your nervous system has gone, it's too much. There's been too much stress for too long, or too much stress way too quickly. I need to protect myself here and just shut the system down. We're using way too much energy on anxiety and stress. And the only way for me to cope is to shut down. This is a nervous system that's saying, I actually feel out of capacity and quite helpless in this moment. There's nothing I seem to be able to do to fight this thing. There's nothing I can do to get away from it. So what can I do? I can shut down. That's all I've got if I can't fight or run, right? So reflexive freeze can happen as when we've been through this in the past. So this is our last resort when we can't fight or flee. Our nervous system makes predictions about our future based on what we've been through in the past. So if you've been through chronic patterns of stress, or you've been in a freeze response because you went through something really traumatic in your past, your nervous system will remember this is a response that you need to go into if something that even slightly resembles that threat comes up again. And that doesn't mean it has to look like the same situation. If your body even begins to feel the same feelings, it might have that sense of starting to feel stressed and tightening up. It might be those physical somatic things. It might be having the thought of, oh my God, here we go again. It's all helpless and hopeless and happening again. The system may just reflexively go back into this place of freeze. And that's tricky, because then whenever you face anything that feels a bit stressful, anytime in your life now, you find yourself kind of shutting down. You find yourself maybe withdrawing and isolating and feeling like everything sort of slumps and you can't get going and you can't get motivated. And you may still have that real sense of anxiety and fear, but it's just like, I can't get myself moving. And you might think, why am I acting like this? it's just a work stress, or it's just a presentation that I've got coming up. It's just an assignment. It's, just a bit of a tricky time in my relationship. Whatever it is that's stressing you now, it can feel like you're in this really disproportionate response sometimes. And that might be an indication that this is quite reflexive. This is something that your nervous system has done before. And so it's where it feels it needs to go anytime something feels threatening. It's known in the past, I haven't been able to fight, I haven't been able to get away from it. So this is what we're going to do. So hopefully that makes sense. Please let me know in the chat if any of this isn't landing, and I will find a new way of explaining it, because we sometimes need to hear information delivered in different ways in order to make it land. Okay, so burnout freeze is another kind of layer that we can get to when we've been in a stress mode for too long. So the body and nervous system cannot sustain sympathetic nervous system activation for too long. Otherwise, it's going to move us into freeze to preserve energy and to protect us. And so burnout can happen if we've been, chronically overworking, or we've been in a job that's been really demanding and high stress, and we're kind of living on adrenaline and cortisol in our work to get us through. So many of you will relate to that from a work perspective, or from just giving so much in so many different areas of your life, so that you're actually running on this kind of cortisol and sympathetic nervous system energy. It's like you are just gas pedal all the way down all the time when you're living a lifestyle like that, right? When your work is taxing, when your life is really draining. And eventually the system goes into preserve energy and into freeze. And that's what we know as burnout, which is a really hard place to come back from. It's a real slow and steady journey. So this is where we might feel fatigue or compassion fatigue. So if anyone's been in like a helping profession and they've worked with people, victims, if you're in, defense or government or police or anything like that, if you're in a counseling or therapeutic mode, you might be working with a lot of clients. And if you start to feel that I don't actually feel any compassion anymore, I feel apathy, I feel numb to hearing things, this can be a sign of us going into freeze. It's the body saying, I can't take any more. I'm going to start to dissociate and disconnect from this. All right, I'm just noticing that there's a question as well as if there's a mixed state with lots of energy, but also in freeze. So that one is just coming up and it makes total sense. I think it's just after this one. So we also have another layer of freeze, of full collapse freeze, right? So this is like the ultimate expression of a last resort response from our nervous system. This is what happened with the mouse, with toast. So in this place, our heart rate actually lowers. So you're going to feel maybe a bit faint or a bit woozy and dizzy, and some people will completely faint or collapse. So I'm just seeing someone saying, I can see you and the others, but no audio. So I think everyone else has got my audio. So if you're not hearing me, I would go out and come back in. All right, so some people, some of the clients that I've worked with have experienced this full collapse freeze. I've worked with quite a few people who experience this related to health anxiety. So they've gone in to have a blood draw or to, have a medical checkup. And it's that complete feeling of helplessness. I can't run, I can't do anything. The body completely shuts down. And so that's where you might faint. So some people who do faint when they're really afraid, it's just their system ultimately expressing them to say we need to completely reset. It's like a hard reset on a computer. And then there's our anxious freeze. So this is what we were sort of just referencing just then. This is anxious freeze is sort of like when we have roughly equal parts of sympathetic nervous system and dorsal vagal activated at the same time. So this is a real mixed state. So when we looked at that diagram earlier, it kind of looks like these branches are separate, but the way that it really works is that all of these states can blend. So we get these blended nervous system states. So just to give you another example before we talk about anxious freeze of blended states, if you were to blend sympathetic nervous system and ventral vagal, so if you remember, that's a stress response with a feeling of safety and connection, that's activation, mobilization with safety, and that gives us the ability to play and to play competitive sport and to dance and to have fun. So that's a mixed blended state of that. When we're doing those playful, fun, activated things, we actually have sympathetic nervous system energy online. Another blended state is if we blend dorsal vagal, so that's the body shutting down, with ventral vagal, a feeling of safety. So we then blend immobilization with safety, and that gives us being able to lie down and go to sleep at night. It gives us rest, it gives us intimacy. So anxious freeze is a delightful blend of sympathetic and dorsal. So it leads us, we end up feeling really stuck and flat and unmotivated, and we're doom scrolling, but underneath it, we're feeling this sense of anxiety and urgency. Like, I know I should be doing this thing, but I cannot seem to move. I can't get myself going. You know, it's like, I need to do this. I have to do this, but I can't get going. So in this place, the body's experiencing what happens in sympathetic. So it's got a higher heart rate, a higher breathing rate. It's probably holding muscle tension. Things feel gurgly and yuck in your stomach. Your body is feeling that sense of racing, but you're not really moving, but you're kind of slumping, but you can't get going. And so it's in terms of intervention, what do we do in this place? Because we'll come into this a bit more. But a part of this is we have to complete that stress response to down regulate, which just means to bring that sympathetic energy down. So partly we've got to do things with our body that help us get that racing out, right? Because it wants to run, it wants to fight, but the body is completely shut down and not doing anything. So we're like stuck in this energy inside internally that needs to be completed. And then we're also needing, so that's that down regulation piece, but we're also needing to kind of up regulate with breath, with movement, to come out of feeling slumped and stuck. So we're kind of coming at this place from a couple of different angles. And I'm noticing in the chat that this one in particular is resonating with people, is that they're feeling a lot of this. You know, it's like, I'm anxious, I need to get out of bed for work, I just can't seem to get going. And it's really uncomfortable. And actually, it's true that a lot of people live in this state, in a really dominant state of this, and don't get to be in their ventral vagal very much. And some people live in fluctuation, which I think coming to next. Yes, no, high functioning. This is a very similar one. Okay, so a high functioning freeze is very similar to the one before, in that we're going to have a lot of sympathetic nervous system charge, probably more, and just a bit of dorsal vagal. This is a mixed state. And you see this a lot with someone who's like racing around, they're stressed, they're busy, they're really overloaded, or even they're just in a really high demand job. So there's a lot of stress in their job, and you see them, they're just functioning at this crazy fast level, doing so much in their work and in their life. So this happens in high risk jobs, high demand jobs, corporate world jobs, stressful environments when you've got lots going on. And it seems like sometimes they look like they got it all together, or you're just like, how is this person doing it? It's so much. But under the surface, they're really in sympathetic dominance, right? They're really overloaded. And a lot of the time, they're actually very dissociated and disconnected. A lot of the time, you know, we're doing numbing behaviors. So we are doing things to try to manage that energy, which often looks like emotional eating or Even it's like excessively going to like gym classes, or it's like emotional kind of therapy shopping, you know, or they're fidgeting all the time. So they're quite out of touch, really, and maybe engaging in coping strategies that aren't helpful, like they have to go home and drink a bottle of wine every night. So they maintain this go, go, go energy. They may then collapse when they get home. So it might look like my day is just going for it. And then when I get home, I'm just slumped on the couch, or it may just be a continual high functioning with that kind of level of dissociation. That's where the dorsal comes in, the dissociative part comes in with high functioning freeze, because this is very sympathetic charged. Someone just said this is all of my clients in academia. This is definitely a place that you see with academics. And, you know, we have clients, and we have people who are doing their like masters, and they're doing their PhDs and things. And this is really the place that they're in. So, you know, it's a really high level of stress, but there's just this element to this high functioning freeze of dissociation and disconnect. It's like we're not actually tuned in to the fact that your body is screaming to you, it's so stressed. We've had to cut that off so that we can keep going. And so this eventually probably leads to burnout unless something is done about it. This is our fluctuating freeze. And this is probably, I would say, the second most experienced state of freeze. So many of you just said that you experience the anxious freeze. This is probably the second most experienced one, is moving back and forward between stress and collapse. So we're constantly fluctuating outside of our nervous system's capacity. We may have heard this referred to as a window of tolerance. So your window of tolerance, you can see along the middle there. I don't know if you can see my cursor when I put it across the screen on here. I don't think, maybe you can't. But the window of tolerance is that chunk in the middle, right? So our window of tolerance is a place where we're pretty regulated and we're kind of resilient, and this is ventral vagal. And even within that, we're going to fluctuate up and down. Like we're going to experience a little bit of stress in our day. Oh gosh, traffic, you know, I'm running late. Like, come on, move. We've got to get going. But it's kind of happening within a level that we can cope with when it's in our window of tolerance. So we're getting our blended states, we're getting our ventral vagal, we're cruising. Fluctuating means that we're going up here into hyper arousal, so that's sympathetic, and starting to feel like it is actually too much now. I'm really starting to stress. We've actually gone into a threat response in that place. So when you're hyper aroused, your heart's racing, you're getting flooded with cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. You're experiencing those somatic sensations and symptoms. Hopefully what happens is the nervous system, because it's okay if it goes up there sometimes, brings you back down and you cruise along in your window of tolerance again. But what might also happen is it shoots you into hypoarousal, and that's a dorsal vagal. So this is so common for people when we live in this, and at work, or when we're in our day-to-day life, we're in that sympathetic, we're racing about, we're not really present, we're thinking about the next thing we've got to do, we're angry, we're reactive, we're irritable, like the tiniest things just piss you right off. Like that's a really good indication you're in sympathetic. And then we slump. The end of the day comes and I cannot get myself off the couch. I know that I've got things I need to do around the house. I can't do it. So that is an indication of going in and out of our window of tolerance, probably not spending too much time. All right. I hope this is making sense and kind of landing. I'd love to hear from those who are in the live which one of these you are kind of identifying with at the moment, or if you've got questions, or if this is just making sense. This is just my last little kind of thing to wonder about for you as well, is that experiencing a little bit of freeze is sometimes a sign of some healing. So after we've been in prolonged stress, we've been anxious for a long time, we've been unsympathetic, this then suddenly going into freeze. So this is sort of more if you've just been there for a while, maybe you're thinking, oh yeah, things have been really stressful, but now I'm kind of here. This might be our body trying to hibernate a little bit. So turning inwards, trying to calm down again. And it's not where we want to stay. We don't want to get stuck here. But actually, this is a place of rest as well. This is your nervous system saying, it's been too much for too long, or something happened too soon and too suddenly, and I need to turn inward. And it's a natural progression out of a prolonged state of stress or trauma. So it's okay sometimes to just be compassionate. It's always okay, sorry, to be compassionate, but it's okay to just be and freeze a little bit. This is your body's way of saying we need to rejuvenate the energy. Okay. I'm glad to see in the chat that things look to be like they're making sense. Brilliant. Okay, and also just to respond to a question that's come up there, you might resonate with many different parts of those layers of freeze. So remember, that is us sort of like really breaking down a freeze response into lots of little segments, and it doesn't have to be a perfect fit into any of those things. We just know what freeze kind of feels like. We don't have to necessarily say, this is the layer I'm experiencing. It's enough just to kind of tune in. All right. And also to say, because as someone has said here, it's like a signal we've overdone something, or something's been too much and we need to kind of come back home and pay attention to what's happening in our life. So all of the emotions that we have are just messages from our body and our nervous system to let us know something. So freeze is going to show up across different areas, across our thoughts. So your thoughts are actually a reflection of your nervous system state. You can't actually control what pops up into your head. But obviously we can think thoughts on purpose, but many of them just pop up, and we can't control that, but we can control how we respond to that. And we can control the fact that we can be aware of them as being a reflection of the state that we're in. Freeze is going to show up in our behaviors. So they're a reflection. And we can intervene at that level as well, because we've got control over how we behave for the most part. We've got our physical sensations, or our somatic sensations, and our emotions. And those two are the language of the nervous system. What I mean when I say the language of the nervous system is that it doesn't communicate in thought. And so a lot of modalities of therapy, or a lot of the things that we try to do for ourselves when we're in a icky place, is just to be, okay, I've got to change my thinking. And we do a lot of things from the top down. We're trying to change our thoughts. We're trying to change our beliefs. And whilst that absolutely has a place, the nervous system doesn't really respond to that so much. It's not how it communicates. So it needs things to be done at the level of the body in order to communicate with that place. So this is just my little freeze the possum poster, just to kind of summarize what a freeze might sort of look like. So we're going to feel flat, unmotivated, fearful, threatened, stuck, overwhelmed, depressed, exhausted, shame. Somatically, so in the body, we might feel immobile or dissociated, postural slumping. So you can just check in at any point and notice, what's my posture doing? Do I find myself slumped in chairs and rounded through the spine, collapsed through the chest, rounded through the shoulders, head down. Do I find that a lot? Or do I find that collapsing is coming with a hunching and a holding of tension? Collapse, tiredness and exhaustion. We might feel spacey, fainting, uncoordinated, digestive issues, sleep disturbance. And along with any of that muscle tension, there might be chronic neck or shoulder pain. Just chronic pain anywhere is often a sign of nervous system dysregulation. So if you've kind of medically done what you could around an area of pain, or a doctor has said there's nothing medically going on with something that's happening for you somatically, and you've had that long term, then chances are it's a sign of stuck emotions, unprocessed trauma, showing up in the body somatically. So I think many of us have probably had that experience of going to the doctor and they say like that a symptom is in your head, or they call it psychosomatic. But actually it is a manifestation, a genuinely real physical manifestation of something stuck or unprocessed, or of a body that is dysregulated. And we know that depression and anxiety is an inflammatory experience for the body. So when you are loaded with cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline, and that isn't being moved or processed, it's inflammatory. And especially if we have that long term. And so we get people who have long-term neck, shoulder, back pain, joint pain, and IBS and things like that. So IBS is, like that irritable bowel kind of like symptoms of having bloating and gut issues and all of those things. So if that is standing out to anyone in terms of those symptoms, inside the membership, we also have a 2-hour-long masterclass on gut health and nutrition, where an expert speaker has come in to deliver that. So I would definitely go and do that after this if you're in that place. Because chronic pain or chronic health symptoms themselves are kind of a chicken and egg, but a real marker of us feeling depressed, because we get so caught in our heads in the experience of the stuckness that is chronic pain, the debilitation, and then we get into the cycle, right? This health cycle, kind of chronic pain cycle, where our thoughts feed the pain and our pain feeds the thoughts, our emotions feed the pain. So let's carry on with this slide. Behaviors. So wanting to lie down and sleep, withdrawing. So that might be withdrawing from your loved ones, socially isolating yourself, struggling to listen or to concentrate, no motivation, not engaging, giving up, social isolation, not trying, low confidence, not looking after yourself as well, trouble sleeping. So those are the things we'll experience. Thoughts, spacey, maybe. Thoughts that sound like, I can't do this, I'm not enough, I don't know how, I don't know what to do, it's hopeless, what's the point, I'm stuck, it's not going to get better. If any of those thoughts are resonating, they are coming from your nervous system in freeze, right? So our thoughts are a reflection of our nervous system state and a reminder that not all thoughts are true. I like to see them more as information and feedback as to, this is the state that I'm in. My thoughts are letting me know that. I don't have to believe all of my thoughts. I can do things to intervene with these thoughts. We'll come to that soon. But also just like holding compassion for that. This is letting me know I'm actually in a place of freeze or sympathetic. And that as soon as I'm in this place, my thoughts are sticky. I call them sticky brain times. What that means is when you are in these places in your nervous system, your thoughts are more likely to get stuck. They're going to be ones that you ruminate on, you go round on, and they're usually not true, or they are into that unhelpful thinking style, which we are coming to, all the thought stuff as well. Just popping that little poster here. This is just like a compassionate reminder, really, that I think there's the kind of what people see when we're in freeze, and it's really easy for us to see someone in this place and think that they're just lazy and they're not motivated and they're like not connecting, and it's easy to judge that in someone, or to feel like people are judging that in us. This is also the column of things that we probably like focus on the most in ourselves. We call ourselves lazy and unmotivated. And what people don't see is what's really going on in the freeze there. Just a question I'm noticing in the chat: can freeze cause a bad memory? So yes, absolutely. We're going to have brain fog. We're going to have issues with memory. We're going to have issues with concentration. So we think about this from, let's pop the nervous system to the side for 1 second, and we think about this from a brain perspective. Imagine that this, my fist is the brain. This would be the brain stem. Okay, so this is the bit that controls like breathing and temperature and heart rate. This is the prefrontal cortex, and all this area and that control, it's like the CEO of the brain. And this is where you're going to have rational thought, logical thinking. This is where we put language to emotion. This isn't where we hold memory, but this is where we sequence it and language it. So yeah, that's all of that kind of higher level functioning stuff that we do. And then inside the brain, we kind of flip the lid here and look in the middle. This is our limbic system, or the emotional center of the brain. So this is where the amygdala is. So this is the one that's doing sending the alarm and putting us into anxiety or fight. And this is also where we have our hippocampus, which and our thalamus. So there's memory, and then there's kind of taking on sensory information and diverting that around the brain, letting the front brain or the prefrontal cortex know. So when we are really in a threat response, so when we're in anxiety, fight, when we're in flop and freeze, we are really quite driven by our limbic system, and the prefrontal cortex isn't as online when we're under threat. So we're going to have issues with linking our memory into this kind of stored in language, and all of this is going to happen. And it's also going to struggle with memory consolidation. That may also happen because our sleep goes out the window, and we know that what happens in our sleep is memory consolidation. So if we're not sleeping very well, or we're not sleeping for long enough, we're not getting as many stages of sleep that help memory over the night. So there's that. There's also when we think about trauma, that causes massive changes to memory. And so many of us, when we've been through a trauma, the traumatic memory is not stored, or is not processed in the same way a normal memory is. They're very fragmented, and there's a real disconnect in the part of the brain that languages those experiences, that languages emotion. So sorry, that was quite a long-winded answer, but the short answer is yes. There is going to be changes we see in memory caused by any type of stress threat response. It's not to say that we have to remember a trauma to process it. We don't. We can still process things when they're not kind of they're non-verbal memories. That's okay. We can still process those things, and we can always improve memory. It's all about really trying to bring that prefrontal cortex back online, which just means, how do we regulate the nervous system? And the really good thing, because it's sounding all like, oh my goodness, doom and gloom, is that we know about neuroplasticity. We know that our brain and our nervous system is malleable and plastic, and we can change it. We can heal it, and we can create new pathways, and we can learn how to widen our window of tolerance, our nervous system's capacity. So all of it, we can do something about. And sorry to do questions in the middle of our slides, but I'll be sending all these posters out as well as a part of this. Okay, let's go to some top-down tools and interventions. So we're going to look at some of the things we do at the level of thought, beliefs, prefrontal cortex, and then we'll back that up with bottom up and body stuff soon. All right, so these are our unhelpful thinking styles. You'll get this poster as well as a part of this, because this for me is something I don't use these anymore. I don't use cognitive behavioral methods on myself anymore, I should say, sorry. But this was something that was very helpful to me in the beginning when I was really swamped by unhelpful thinking styles and didn't realize that I hadn't made that kind of the space, the gap between myself and my thoughts. So here are the common ones: catastrophizing and minimizing. So this is where we're going to blow things out of proportion, or we're going to make something seem less important than it is. So you could do either of these in freeze. A freeze could look like this real kind of black and white thinking of everything is, doom and gloom, and I'll never get better. Or it could be where we really minimize our experience. We might say, like, for goodness sake, like everyone else just gets on with it. Everyone else seems to cope with their stress. And so my stress isn't that big of a deal and I shouldn't be feeling like this. So we really minimize maybe what's led us to freeze. And that can just be especially true if it feels like what triggered us into it is pretty minor. Remember that it could be reflexive freeze. So whilst the threat itself might not be proportionate to our response, our nervous system does not care. It felt like it was a threat. I've been through threats before. I need to shut things down. So us beating ourselves up for it doesn't change or help that. There's emotional reasoning. So assuming that because we feel a certain way, whatever we're thinking must be true. Now, this is such a common thing. We confuse our emotions to be facts and we use them to back up our thoughts. Now, I always say, yep, all emotions are valid, all emotions are messages, but sometimes we can be misreading, or they can be a bit off. They can be a threat response that isn't necessarily going to be helpful to us, right? And so if you are feeling like, okay, because I'm feeling really flat and down and low right now, it must be true that this is hopeless, that I'm useless, that I'm weak. So there's that emotion backing up a thought to try to prove it to be true. That's not true or helpful. Shoulding, and I always remember this, and I've said it before, is because one of my cognitive behavioral therapy tutors back when I was studying said we need to stop shoulding on ourselves, and I liked that expression. Shoulding is when we're critical, harsh, and demanding of ourselves, saying I should or I shouldn't. That usually comes with guilt or feeling like a failure. Or we can also should on others. That's not helpful either. But we do a lot of shoulding in freeze. Oh, I should go to the gym. I should go for a walk. I should be doing the housework. I shouldn't be lying here on the couch. That's pretty unhelpful when your nervous system hasn't chosen it. All it wants to do to protect you is to slump and shut things down. And our brain is just like doubling down and loading up on shame and guilt and self-criticism on top of that. A more helpful approach would be compassion and understanding that we're here for this reason and I can do things that are a lot more helpful to get out of it than shoulding on myself. Just seeing that it's looking like it's resonating in the chat. Keep those little comments coming. Even if I don't read them out, I'm kind of seeing them, which helps me to know that you're connecting to the content. All or nothing thinking, that's black and white thinking, right? So we view things in extremes. We do this even from freeze when we're like, I used to go to the gym 4 times a week. I'm not going at all right now. I might as well give up. It's useless, right? That's all or nothing thinking. We decide we're going to start doing something again, but because we're in freeze, it's tricky. So say we only do it once that week instead of 4 times, we say, I'm a failure. This is all or nothing thinking. We're not seeing things for the parts. And it's really important that we catch this all or nothing thinking style. Jumping to conclusions. So this is imagining that we know what other people are thinking or predicting what's going to happen. Okay. And that's lots of what ifs. So we might be like predicting things are going to go badly. So we go into freeze because we are visualizing that it's not going to work out. Or we might be thinking people must think I'm really lazy, or, they must be judging me. So just being mindful of that. Filtering, we're only paying attention to certain types of evidence or only focusing on the bad over the good. This is going to be really, really common with the depression aspect of freeze, or the low mood, or the inner critic, the shaming aspect of freeze, is that you are only paying attention to the things that are going wrong. And you're only paying attention to the things that feel like you're failures. And you're filtering out all the other evidence. We're going to explore that a little more coming up, because self-sabotage wraps into this, and because it's fascinating in terms of what's happening in your brain when it comes to this part of freeze. Personalization is blaming yourself or taking responsibility for something that wasn't entirely your fault, or not your fault at all, or blaming other people for things that you should be taking some ownership for. This is a hard one to swallow. Labeling is assigning labels to yourself or others. They're judgmental, name calling, I'm lazy, I'm stupid, those kinds of things. So this poster will come out to you. This might be something that you print or you have on your phone, or you just start to become a little bit aware and mindful of your thoughts. So when you're in a place of feeling frozen, or just any time in the day when you're noticing something, just check in and say, what story is it that I'm telling myself right now? What is it that I'm thinking in this moment? And see if you can just observe for a second the types of things you think when you're in any of these threat responses. When you're in anger, what is it that's happening? Is that catastrophizing? Is it jumping to conclusions? Is it shoulding? Just what is it that's happening? What is it when I'm slumped? And I love to just do this with curiosity and compassion. Those are my 2 C's, the conditions that I kind of want everyone to try to have when they do any of this work in any of my classes and courses. Compassion and curiosity. Can we be kind? How can I be kinder to myself and allow space for whatever I'm experiencing? And how can I get curious? How could I treat myself like an experiment and just notice and witness and observe with curiosity what's happening? Right, so here is where we just look a little bit more at some of that kind of fascinating brain stuff. These are really common traps of the freeze response. There's the negativity bias and the confirmation bias, which are very similar. So to explain what's happening there, everybody has an inbuilt negativity bias. And this is like a survival and evolutionary mechanism, right? So when we were cavemen, if we weren't programmed to look for the negative, i.e., to look for threat, to look for things that could go wrong, you would have just died. You would have fallen off a cliff or run out of food or been eaten by a saber-toothed tiger if you were not looking for those things. And so this is a survival thing. It's not something that's going to go away, but it's something that in our modern day human era, we are so much more susceptible to depression and just negative thinking because of this. And so your brain is going to naturally look for things that could go wrong. And this is also where intrusive thoughts come in. And this can be really scary for people when we have those intrusive thoughts that give us that whoosh of kind of fear, like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Why have I thought this? There's a survival aspect to that. There's a whole course on intrusive thoughts, so we won't go into that here. But just to say, be mindful of your negativity bias. Be mindful that your natural state is putting on gray tinted glasses and spotting things that could go wrong. And when you're in sticky brain, when you're in freeze or depression, when your inner critic's being very loud, this part of you is going to be really strong. Many of us do work to counteract it, and that might look like, working with our thinking, bringing in gratitude, becoming aware of thought, mindfulness practices. If you have had years of practice of a negativity bias, and that's not as in you chose to be negative, that is, you might have been through chronic stress or trauma in your past, your bias will be much stronger and much more strongly geared, because it's had to keep you safe. Thank goodness for it. It would have gotten you through those times in your life. So it's just to be aware that it's going to be there now, and we're going to have to do some work around it to show it a little love and to show it that we can be safe. Comparison is another trap, another common trap that's going to come up a lot for us in freeze, because in freeze, your inner critic's going to get quite strong, and it's going to compare you to others. And it's going to say, everyone else is handling it. Everyone else is managing their stress. What's wrong with me? So just being, again, really mindful of that. That's going to need heaps of compassion. Comparison is also evolutionary. We'll never totally get rid of it. We had to, back in the day, kind of be comparing ourselves and sizing ourselves up to other people in the tribe, so that we knew that we were fitting in, because if we weren't in a tribe, we probably would die. There's a lot of things that were going to kill us back in those days. So you can understand why these are such strong traits. So it's really biological and evolutionary to compare yourself, and we just need to be mindful of that and the multiple traps that pull us into comparison. The RAS is the reticular activating system. And this is a part of your brain that's responsible for looking for patterns and also for filtering in information that it thinks is relevant to you, and filtering out information it doesn't think is relevant to you. So one way I like to kind of give an example of how this system works in your brain is, have you ever decided, right, I'm going to buy a new car. I'm going to buy a Mini. I don't know. Just think of a car that you wanted to buy in the past. I'm just going to say a Mini. Then it feels like all of a sudden, everywhere you look, there are Minis. Like they're driving around everywhere. Just please tell me if this is making sense, if you've noticed this in your life. Suddenly, all you see is that make and model of car. And it's like, did everyone just go out and buy a Mini all of a sudden? Like, this is ridiculous. I've never seen so many before. Like, obviously, of course, not everyone just went out and bought Minis. What actually happened is this information suddenly became relevant to you. So this part of your brain started filtering that information to you and seeing that pattern. And why is that? Well, because we need to be able to then go and find our Mini in the car park when we've been grocery shopping. So we're going to start to see it everywhere. And this is a really useful system when it comes to that. But where this can work against us is if the pattern that we are trying to find is evidence of things where we've failed. For example, evidence of things where people have done something to us that's untrustworthy or damaging. This system is going to pick up on all of the evidence, and not only just pick up, but actively filter it to you and actively filter out other types of evidence that doesn't support this thing. So you're not going to see all the Hondas, even though there's probably more of them. Your brain will filter that out. It's just going to show you the minis. Same. So when we're depressed, that's really unhelpful because it's going to filter all the evidence that we're hopeless, helpless, failures, and anything that says, oh, but I got out of bed today and I brushed my teeth, or I showed up to work despite it, filtered out. Doesn't matter to the brain. So we really got to work the system to our advantage by kind of flipping and actively looking for things to be grateful for, or things that don't support what its current pattern is. So I'm gonna I haven't, before I do the monkey business one, sorry. And so inner critic, sorry, is another one of our really big traps. And this is something that I'm going to be doing a masterclass on coming up in membership. So I won't go into it massively here because there's a lot involved. We know what the inner critic is though, right? We know it's that little devil on the shoulder that's always pointing out things that are wrong. It's pointing out things about you that it doesn't like. Just a reminder that your inner critic is not you, and it's not true. This is something that we've internalized from things people have said to us in the past, from society's narrative, and our inner critics get really strong. And so what I encourage you to do, just before we go to monkey business, is to externalize these parts of you. So give your inner critic a name, give your comparison part a name, give your, whatever you want to call it, your negativity bias part a name. Call it Negative Nancy, like have fun with it. Externalize it. So Patricia is as someone's just said in the chat, Patricia's the name of my inner critic. And I think many people ended up calling theirs Patricia. So think of someone in your life who's a downright pest and call your negativity bias after them. And then when you notice these thinking styles coming up, when you notice you're in comparison or you're really filtering out in all this unhelpful information, be like, oh, okay, that's Negative Nancy. That's my Negative Nancy part. We don't externalize it to shame it or be awful to it. We can say, you know what, Negative Nancy, it makes sense that you're here. It's been a rough time. I know that you're actually only trying to keep me safe. I know that this is just what you're programmed to do, but I've got this. I don't need to listen or to be guided by you today. So this is parts work, right? There's a whole course on parts work, like the inner child and past self-healing course in my membership, if that's something that resonates. So I'm gonna, I've got myself into a pickle here, but I'm gonna have to stop the screen share for a second because I just want to share with you. And I hope this works. And if it doesn't, I'll just send you the link to play it for yourself. Could someone just confirm in the chat that that monkey business, you're seeing a monkey business thing in the background? Yeah. Okay, sweet. I don't think you have to hear it because I'm not sure if the sound will come across. You don't have to hear it. All right, so here we go. So you're going to count how many times the player's wearing white past the ball. We might just need to reload it for a second here. Just bear with me. I'm just going to reload because I think it's just having a little moment. And we get to see a cat, which is always a good thing. All right, so here we go. Count how many times the player's wearing white past the ball. Okay, let me know if you're not seeing this. Who saw the gorilla? And who saw, if you did see, the curtain changing color and the player leaving the team? Okay, so I'm hoping that came across on the play all right there. This is just like, to me, because when I was showing this for the first time, I thought I was a real smart ass because I saw the gorilla. And so I thought, oh, I'm obviously very, very intelligent and so aware and perceptive. I didn't see the curtain. I didn't see the person changing changing out of the team. And so this is such a cool kind of example of these filtering systems at work. And you could imagine, I'm just going to share my slides again. You could imagine how this would work with us starting to pick up only negative information or examples of us not being enough. Our brain's going to get very good at filtering out other things that could be useful. Okay, cool. Let's carry on. Okay, so how do we approach our unhelpful thoughts? Okay, so I always think of it as we have these kind of two ways that are both really useful, both have their merits. One is the CBT approach. This is cognitive behavioral therapy, which works on this idea that our thoughts and our feelings and our actions are all intertwined and they all affect one another. And while we cannot directly change our emotions, so therefore we can't directly change the state of our nervous system, we can change the way we respond to our thoughts and we can change our actions. So that's kind of the whole premise. So you can take this approach. You can take the idea of beginning to notice your unhelpful thoughts. And that doesn't mean to judge them. It just means I can notice this is one of those unhelpful thinking styles. And then to rewrite those thoughts to be true and compassionate and realistic. And that might be actively rewriting them on some paper, like writing down an example of a thought and then challenging it. Or it might be doing that in the moment in your mind. So this absolutely has merit. And there's a lot to CBT. This is one of the modalities that I'm trained in. And I'm going to teach you some of the ways to do this, but it's not the only way to do it. And so mindfulness is the other thing. And of course, remember that at the moment, we're only addressing top-down cognitive approaches. We are not even looking yet at the body up, the bottom up, the somatic, which is very crucial. So mindfulness, or a mindful acceptance approach, is another way for us to approach our thoughts. This is coming in with the conditions or the intention of non-judgment and non-attachment and of observation. So in terms of how I think about this is like, okay, you could see your thoughts as like clouds passing over the sky in front of you. It could be that, and this is one that I love, is your thoughts are a little bit like books in a library. So just as you're going through the library, maybe you're there to look for a specific book, and along the way, you're going to see all of these other books. And just because they're there on the shelf doesn't mean that you have to get them out. Doesn't mean we need to look into those things. And our thoughts are very similar. Just because they're there, because they pop up, doesn't mean they're going to be relevant or useful or worth exploring. So I'm going to send this little poster out, how to navigate our thoughts. And this takes you through like a really kind of summarized version of both of these things and leads you through how to do that. So I'll send that out for you as a little resource. basically it's, do we challenge and change it? So do we ask ourselves some questions to challenge that thought and rewrite it? Or do we just take a little practice that allows us just to sit for a moment, notice these thoughts, notice that they're just thoughts. They're not necessarily true. I think I sort of take this for granted, but actually so many people have never even clicked with the idea that not all thoughts are true. Not everything we believe is true. So this is another poster that I'm going to send out just as a resource for you, just about, how do you challenge your unhelpful thoughts? And it just gives you some prompts so that you could have a thought and then ask yourself these questions and try to come up with a thought that just feels more balanced, more realistic. Now, something I often say is we're not here to put sugar on shit. And so that means that I don't need you to come up with a thought that is all glitter and unicorns. It has to be realistic and believable. And so some thoughts, it might just be about taking the harsh edges off them so that they feel a bit more compassionate. So we're not going to say, it might be that you just got another bill in the mail and you don't have enough money this week to cover it. And the thought might be, shit, I can't cover my bills. Like, this is so stressful. The replacement thought is not going to be, I live in abundance, I can cover all my bills, money flows to me, like some coaches might have you doing. That is such a load of crap. That's not going to make you be able to pay your bill. So we want to be able to use thoughts that are realistic, but just take the edge off. And just a question, is there a benefit to using one approach over another with clients from different backgrounds? So I think this is all about offering these things. So it's sort of like how I'm doing now, is saying, here's one way of doing it, and you frame up, you explain the framework. This is how CBT is. This is what happens here. This is what mindfulness is. Shall we explore one? Shall we explore them both and have a week or two on each where you experiment and see which one suits? So, because as I said, when I first sort of started trying to work on my own anxiety and really my inner critic, my mind was full of unhelpful thinking styles that I didn't know were that. And so initially kind of becoming aware of that, just that awareness of thought, awareness of, oh my goodness, this is this type of thinking style, like other people have this. And then being able to kind of challenge that. So that was useful for me then. I also had to learn how to even have a compassionate or realistic thought. So that was useful then. Now I use mindful acceptance. That's the only approach that I use, and that's just where I'm at with it. And so I would just get people or yourself to have a play and experiment. All right, we're going to just chat a little bit about belief blocks. So we often have in a freeze response beliefs, limiting beliefs that sound like I'm lazy. We have that guilt when it comes to slowing down, like the body's saying, I need to slow down. I'm really struggling. And we say, I'm lazy. And think about where these beliefs have come from as well. Like in your past, what has work ethic meant to you? Or what model of work or busyness have you been modeled by parents or in your earlier work years? Or when you were doing nothing as a child or teenager, were you berated for that? Like these beliefs come from somewhere. We might think I'm not capable. When we're still, all of that anxiety comes rushing in when we try to be still. And we think I can't get through this. I'm not capable of sitting with this emotion. I'll never be better. I'll never be happy. That is a really common belief when we're in freeze. And where does that come from as well? I'm a failure. We might have the belief that I'm a failure. Imagine what that system, that reticular activating system, would find and filter If we believed I'm a failure, imagine the filtering work that is happening. I'm beyond help, or it's hopeless. I've got in brackets there learned helplessness. Now, this is something that can happen for people when maybe they've been through trauma, chronic or complex trauma, or chronic stress in their past. And the result of all of that has been they haven't been able to get out of it. Nothing they did helped or worked. And this is so true when maybe you've grown up in an environment where you had parents who were abusive or neglectful, or so wrapped up in their own relationship or their own mental health. And so nothing you did as a child got you attachment or your needs met. You could have tried getting angry. You could have tried hiding and running. Nothing worked. And so we have this thing called learned helplessness. And this can be a real self-sabotaging part that comes up, where you might try things, different types of therapy, going to the gym, trying to go to a coffee group, trying to whatever, and your self-sabotage says it's not going to work. Ultimately, nothing works. Ultimately, I end up where I started. So I might as well give up, or I might as well not even try in the first place. That's kind of learned helplessness. And again, I say this not to judge it, but to hold compassion for this part of you that really sadly had learned this. So a little thing on beliefs, but again, as I say, I'm not going to go into this hugely because this will be a part of the inner critic masterclass that comes up. But how do we form a limiting belief? How do these belief blocks form? Well, they form over our lifetime when we kind of bundle up and gather up and link up all of these tricky, negative, traumatic, stressful, damaging events, right, that happen in our life. And so, they could be stringing back from childhood, things that happen in your teenage years, things that happen in adulthood. If they all seem to fit a common theme, remember that activating system, reticular activating system is going to be like, oh, a pattern. And it's going to collect all these events and say, see, you're a failure. Look at all of these examples. And this is how these negative core beliefs or these limiting beliefs form. And it's not really taking into account these blocks, these belief blocks, all of the other things in your life that might not prove it, that might disprove it, but it's going to filter those out because it's not relevant. And the example I often give to clients and to groups around this is, remember that when you're a child, you believed in Santa. And to your core, you believed that this jolly, rotund, red-suited man came down your chimney or through your heat pump vents into your house with presents. And we had evidence for it. So our belief had gathered evidence. So we put carrots out for the reindeer and they were eaten. We put a glass of milk and a cookie out for Santa and that was gone in the morning. The wrapping paper was different than what our parents wrapped it in, if our parents were onto it enough. So I was like, oh, well, that wasn't from them. That was from Santa. And I always joke about, because thinking back to my childhood, my parents obviously would have dusted icing sugar around it would have been my dad's boot. And so I was like, oh, snow. Like, had I cared to investigate, it would have found it was icing sugar. But you have all this evidence, right, that supports this belief. And then one day you find out, it's not true. And so this is what is happening with our limiting beliefs as well, is yes, there was evidence, but it doesn't necessarily mean the belief is true or helpful. So to let go of belief blocks, we first have to identify what our blocks are, what our limiting beliefs are. We acknowledge them, understand them, bring some awareness. Where has this come from? What are the things that I've linked up as evidence for this? And then we can bring in our compassion for this part of us and slowly begin to rewrite these blocks. And how we rewrite it is through evidence, finding new evidence. That can be mining back for gold in our past. So what is it that I've ignored from my past that disproves it or proves some other more helpful belief? And then looking forward, what evidence can I kind of find and begin to see, and what action can I take to either disprove the block or to prove a new belief? So if you have the belief I'm a failure, this is also going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So we're going to unconsciously act in ways that brings about failure. So if I believe I'm a failure, and then I decide I'm going to do an online course, and then there'll be these self-sabotaging parts of me that come up. The first module is really hard, and I start thinking, see, I can't get through anything. I never get to finish anything. I'm stupid. I'm a failure. So rather than asking for help, I start doing less, putting in less effort. I don't research as much. Maybe I turn an assignment in and it doesn't pass. And then I pull out of the whole course because stuff it, it's going to happen anyway. And now I have evidence, more evidence that I'm a failure because I pulled out of my course. So it shows up in the self-fulfilling prophecy. So the action piece is like, how do I act against this? So if I have a belief I'm a failure and I start a course, I'm going to recruit someone to keep me accountable to doing it. I'm going to use someone as a study buddy. I'm going to call on the lecturer and go through the assignment. I'm going to blah, blah, blah. That's going to lead to maybe me just passing the first module. And then maybe I carry on with the course, and then I finish the course, and then I have, action. I have evidence that doesn't support that belief. Alrighty. Affirmations and coping statements. So these, I love this. Like, I really love coping statements, but I don't think I like them in the way that you probably know about them being used traditionally or by a lot of coaches. So make affirmations, make coping statements, use them, great, but make them believable for you. You have to then actually really use them in order to create a new pathway in your brain. You want to repeat them. Maybe you're going to journal on them, and you're going to use them often. Use them in conjunction with visualization and or bilateral stimulation when you do coping statements. So actually, I'll go through the list and then I'll give you an example of what that might actually look like. They can be useful when you're doing when thought challenging or mindful acceptance feels too hard. So sometimes we feel like we just don't even have the capacity or the brain space to challenge a thought right now or to sit with it. And then you could use something like a little mantra or a coping statement and piggyback them onto your current routines, or make them really special so they feel ritualized. So for example, you do a body scan in the shower. So every time you're in the shower, you scan through your body. Maybe you say something you're grateful for. Or maybe you make it really special when you light a little candle and you spend a minute thinking about positive, useful coping statements. Maybe you do that with a meditation. Every time you wash your hands after going to the loo, maybe you repeat a statement 5 times in the mirror. So just to come back to this, because I think a lot of people get this instant affirmations. Someone just actually wrote that you just gave me a real aha moment. I hate affirmations. As soon as I hear the word, I'm like, yak, just gross. But there's the thing, it needs to be believable for me. God, that's enlightening. So I would also feel that about affirmations. They can give you and I've worked with a lot of people who have these blocks that come up around using them. So even just discard the word affirmation and use the word coping statement, something like that, something different. The last thing I do when I use these is look in the mirror and say, I'm amazing. I live in abundance. That doesn't connect for me. Yeah. For some people it does, and that's great if it does. Research has shown affirmations work really well for people who already have really good self-esteem. So it's like, great. That's not the position a lot of people are in. If they want to use affirmation or mantra, they're not in a place of feeling great about themselves. Yakety yak, someone says, right? So it's like you stand in the mirror, you do whatever you say, your affirmations. What happens is this thing called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the discomfort you feel when you have two conflicting beliefs or pieces of evidence. If I believe I'm a bit of a failure right now, or if I believe things aren't going well and life is really hard, and then I stand in the mirror and say, my life is amazing, I welcome happiness into every moment of my day, like, what? You can't reconcile those things together, right? You can't. It doesn't work. So your brain will reject the affirmation. At best, it will just reject it. At worst, it will make you feel worse. It'll make you feel like a failure. So if there's an affirmation that lands, just like, you know, I am working on gratitude. Great. So here's what I do with affirmations and coping statements. If it lands, if it feels believable, it's for you. If it doesn't, and it gives you the ick, either get rid of it or bring it back 90 degrees to something that feels believable, realistic, true, compassionate, logical, in alignment. There's something else I was going to say and I've just lost it. Anyway, we'll come back to it. Oh, also you can add the words I am working on to the start of whatever affirmation you like the sound of. So if you love the idea of I take each moment as it comes, but that doesn't fit for you right now, you just say, I am working on taking each moment as it comes. I am working on it. That is a very gentle, compassionate way to do it. Yeah, so I hope that hopefully that's enough and that's making sense, because I do think there's a place for coping statements, because our brain could be very full right now of a lot of negative beliefs and thoughts. So we do want to give it a sense of what it might feel like to be a bit more balanced, to kind of weigh up, you know, tip the scales a bit here. And so while I am in the shower, I might go through and say, you know, I'm grateful to my body for digesting the food, for my legs for going for walks, for my arms for being able to hug people, just thinking a little bit about some gratitude stuff. You might say, I love my legs for this. I love my belly for this. You might say, I am working on being able to be okay with this part of my body. So take it to whatever layer you need it to be. It might be every morning you come up with a gratitude list. Every night when you lie in bed, you might just come up with a mantra of, you know, I'm working on being kinder to myself. I set an intention to be more compassionate with my thoughts tomorrow. So I hope this is landing and making sense. We're changing the narrative on what affirmations are. So there's definitely a place for these. And I would write down ones that you think you need. So if you identify, this is what you would do if you identified your thoughts, pick ones that keep coming up all the time. You get stuck on a thought that's like, this is going to be another shit day. Or you might say, I can't do this. I can't get myself moving. I'm lazy. I'm unmotivated. Use the thought that keeps happening and use your coping statement as your balancer to that thought. So if it's I'm lazy, you might catch that and go, hang on, that's a labeling thought. I know that's not actually true. I know my body's in a place of freeze. I'm working on allowing myself rest. I'm working on allowing myself guilt-free rest. That might be the coping statement. Okay. Procrastination. All right. We call ourselves lazy and unmotivated, but what is really going on? A brain that is overloaded or a nervous system that is functioning outside of its capacity will revert to familiar pathways and behaviors and to the path of least resistance. Familiarity and comfort over discomfort, growth, and change. So procrastination is very rarely actually anything to do with being an unmotivated person or laziness. So, someone's just asked a question. What is bilateral stimulation from the previous slide? Apologies. I'm just going to go back a slide and just explain how I could use this. If I'm using, this is what I mean. Thank you so much for pulling me up on that. This is what I mean when I say you could use it in conjunction with visualization or bilateral stimulation. All right. How we would use this with visualization is we could either visualize and create a safe place. So that is, I have guided meditations on how to do that in my libraries. But you are bringing to mind a place that feels safe. You're visualizing all of the sensory elements within that, and you can anchor your coping statement to your safe place so that when you go there, it's cemented in. So in your mind, you go to this place, you say, I'm working on being more compassionate. You feel into that. There's the link to visualization, or you visualize yourself doing the thing. So maybe if you've been really frozen and stuck, you visualize going to the gym, going for a walk, because that is still a really powerful way of learning for the brain through visualization. Bilateral stimulation is something, it's one of the things that we use in EMDR. EMDR is one of the leading trauma processing trauma therapies, and it's, again, very science backed and based. A huge amount of research into the efficacy of EMDR. Bilateral stimulation is a very huge component of it. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it reprocesses trauma. It helps us move out of stuck emotions, stuck places. Bilateral stimulation is just some version of stimulating the two sides of your brain, the two hemispheres, in order to A, keep you grounded to the present moment, and B, process information across. So when we talked about how like our memory doesn't get processed in our language, it helps us to do that, to process stuck things. So one bilateral stimulation, which I think you'll know about already, is just our butterfly hug. So it's just crossing the arms and tapping the shoulders in a really rhythmical way. And while you're doing that, you'll be saying your coping statement. So if you're feeling really, really flat, really icky in your mind, you're going to come here and you're going to say, it's okay. I can get through this. I always get through hard things. This will pass. I'm working on allowing myself space, whatever your thing is, right? So you're doing this bilateral stimulation. In EMDR, you can do this, or this is where you might have seen you follow someone's fingers so the eyes go. So we're mimicking like rapid eye movement that happens while we dream, which is when we're processing memories. So you're mimicking that while you're awake. You can have bilateral stimulation sound in your, what are these called? AirPods, headphones. So yeah, you could pair this with bilateral stimulation. All right. Please let me know if there's any more questions on that. We'll keep moving. I'm aware that we're actually approaching the 2-hour mark. I was like, we won't get to 2 hours. Well, you probably will. Okay. Right. So what I thought we would do with this procrastination piece is, first of all, let's put in the bin the idea that this is about not being motivated or being lazy. It's very rarely got anything to do with that. Your brain, when anything feels overwhelming to it, it's going to just want to do what it knows best, and that's doing something habitual. Sometimes that's sitting on the couch watching Netflix. Sometimes it's taking the path of least resistance. So if it's like, I've got a big assignment, something really big happening that I need to do for work, and it feels too much, the brain is going to go, or I could organize that photo album from the 1980s, or it'll say, or I could clean the bathroom. And even though that doesn't feel like a very fun thing to do, it's the path of least resistance. So it'll find anything it can do that doesn't feel uncomfortable. And change and growth and doing something new and getting out of freeze feels uncomfortable. So it procrastinates. So let's break down 5 tools for procrastination. So these again are very top-down tools, but still have their place, very useful. First is not so much a tool as it is an approach and a reminder. Action comes before motivation. If you just wait until you feel motivated, it's not going to happen. The motivation isn't just going to manifest itself into your body and suddenly you're going to want to do the thing that you've been avoiding. Action comes first, and action builds momentum and motivation. So basically, unfortunately, this means a lot of the time to stop procrastinating, we have to start acting, and that won't feel good. It's disappointing to hear, right? There are things we can do to kind of trick this though. And there are lots of little tricks to get around this. And so there's some coming up in this list. But what you will find, and you've probably already found, like say you really don't want to do a yoga class. You really can't be bothered going for a walk with the dog, but you go, oh, I have to do it. You start. While you're doing it, it often feels like it doesn't feel so bad. And then afterwards, you either think, oh, that was a success. You feel really good about yourself. Or sometimes even during it, you go, I might go for longer. This is actually really nice. So it changes once we start. Number 2 is break it down from global thinking into parts. So when we're procrastinating something that feels overwhelming, we're doing global thinking. We're seeing the entirety of what has to happen in order for us to do this thing, or in order for us to overcome freeze. It might be like, oh my God, there's so much I have to do. There's so much that has to change, or maybe even like, it can't happen right now. And so we just see this big picture, and that feels completely overwhelming and leads us into freeze. So breaking things down into chunks, into manageable chunks, little parts, is going to be really important. And if your freeze at the moment is to do with something really big happening, then write this down, what the chunks to recovery would look like, or what the chunks to getting a project done would look like. And then SMART goals, right? So we're going to actually have measurable timeframe stuff around doing those parts. Okay, 5, 5, or 5 is my little rule of thumb that I like to do when I'm procrastinating. Act within 5 seconds, do 5 minutes, or do 5 things. Act within 5 seconds means if you have an impulse, I should take the dog for a walk, you need to act on that in some way within 5 seconds. Otherwise, your brain will talk you out of doing it. It's kind of like that. I think it's Mel Robbins who has the countdown from 5. She does. Similar thing. So if I think I'm going to take the dog for a walk and I don't do something about it, chances are I will sit on the couch and I will look outside and I will say, a little bit windy. I don't like to walk in the wind. Maybe I'll go later in the evening. By that point, it's already too late. I'm not going to do it. It's gone. If I have the thought I should take the dog for a walk, and without even letting my brain go online, I stand up and start putting on my shoes. Maybe I yell out, let's go for a walk. The dog's going to get hyped up. The toddler's going to get hyped up. Probably my brain's going to come online at that point and go, oh my gosh, I don't want to go. But because it started in action, we'll go and do it. Do 5 minutes is, again, this is a good way to do global to parts. So if I know I've got something really big to do and I'm frozen, just set a timer and do 5 minutes. That's it. And then say to yourself, you have permission at the end of this 5 minutes to stop. Probably you would have built some momentum and you'll keep going. Great. But allow yourself that complete non-judgmental permission to stop if you need to. And that might be 5 minutes of house cleaning, 5 minutes of dog walking, 5 minutes of an assignment, or just do 5 things. The house is a tip. I'm procrastinating cleaning it. I'm going to put away 5 things, for example. Rewards. Your brain loves dopamine, loves it. That's why we doom scroll on reels. That's why we watch back-to-back Netflix episodes. So set yourself up with little rewards that you can have as you tick off things that you need to get done. And the Get Shit Done tool, I absolutely love. It's similar to the Pomodoro technique, and it is a resource in my store. I will send it to you free as a part of this workshop. Let's keep moving because I have been going for a while now. To low mood. So we've talked about this, that in freeze, that is where depression lives, feeling flat or feeling low or feeling stuck. So I wanted to just talk about 10 kind of methods to address low mood. Number 1 is just do one thing. This is again kind of taking us from global to parts. But when we feel really flat and low and depressed, say if I said to you right now to rate your mood on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is the happiest you've ever been, 0 is the worst you have ever felt. If you think, how do I move from a 2 where I am to a 10? It's too much, right, for our brain. And so we tend to slump even more into this feeling of helplessness. So every time I'm in this place, I ask myself, what is just one thing I could do right now that would be helpful, that would be good for my body, or that would be showing myself compassion? What's just one thing I could do that might lift my mood? What's one thing I could let go of? So just one. A mood ladder. Number 2 is a mood ladder. This is again, where are you on that scale of 1 to 10? How could you move just one rung up the ladder? Not how could you get to 10? What could you do just to move up one rung? And to do this, you might ask yourself, what do I look like at each rung of the ladder? Or what does a 6 on the ladder look like? What am I doing in my life? What activities? Who am I around? And pull from those to do a one thing. And that one thing, one rung up the ladder might be, I need to start just going for a 5-minute stroll around the block in the morning. That's my one rung up, would probably be that. Number 3 is control. So with this, let's focus on the things that are within our control, our circle of control, and be mindful of when we are consumed by our circle of concern, which is around the outside, and we have no control over. So in your circle of concern are things like bills, interest rates at the bank, the weather, what other people do, say, think, believe, what comes up on the news, awful events that are happening in the world, right? You get the idea. What's in your control is what you do and say, the boundaries that you put in place in your life, how you act, how you spend your time, what you look at online. You cannot control those other things. So keep bringing yourself back when you notice that you've fallen into helplessness. Might be that you've forgotten what's in your control, or you're living in your circle of concern. Number 4 is called opposite action. This is another CBT. Is it circle of concern is the name of it. Concern. So I'm concerned about things that I'm concerned about but can't change. Number 4 is opposite action. And this is a CBT technique where you do the opposite of what it is that you want to do when you're in freeze. Now, this is just one technique. I don't love this in isolation because it might be that you actually just need to allow your body some rest, and opposite action is just like constantly unhelpful. But sometimes opposite action is a cool technique. And this is something I use sometimes too. It's something I might use if I can feel my self-sabotaging or inner critic part saying, let's just sit on the couch and watch Netflix all night. Opposite action might be, there's a yoga class on in half an hour, I'm going to that. Or I'm going to dance to some music for 30 seconds. I'm going to go stand outside on the grass. I don't know. Whatever is opposite of kind of an unhealthy impulse, something to try. And basically what it does is it just snaps the brain into a completely different pathway. So it can be kind of fun and useful. And I do think you can have quite a lot of fun with that one. Number 5 is lower the bar. Please lower the bar for yourself. It's not usually the advice you would hear. Like, it's certainly not high-end coaching advice. That usually in life, of course, we want to be, raising the bar for ourselves, but we don't actually always need to be striving. And often when we're stuck or depressed, the problem is that we're holding ourselves to this standard that's really so quite far removed from where we're at right now. And that becomes the thing that's really unhelpful and keeps us stuck, because we're comparing ourselves at a 2 to where we were 6 months ago when we were at an 8, right? And so we're like, oh, I should be going to the gym 4 times a week. I should be able to work these hours at work. I was at that point, I was going on like play dates with my toddler, twice a week, or just lower the bar. Like, just a walk is fine. Just lower it way down so that you can experience success. Like, give yourself an opportunity to experience success. That will build. Number 6 is just mindful of your language. So we've sort of already talked about this a little bit when it comes to thoughts. But if you are using things like useless and failure and always and never and those types of things, or when we talk about pain again, we talk about when we get fixated on symptoms, somatic symptoms, we use words like painful, sharp, stabbing, unbearable, things like this. We use this for our emotions too, like, I can't stand it, I'm sick of feeling like this. So this language actually activates the amygdala, activates our threat center, and therefore we feel more pain or more stuck. So this, just mindful of the language we use around these things. Number 7 is movement and exercise. This is a really important part of coming out of freeze, because when we're in freeze, low mood, we're hypo aroused, things are feeling quite shut down. Upregulation asks us to bring in some movement. This does not mean going to CrossFit 5 times a week. Movement might look like standing up and swaying to a song for 30 seconds. But exercise, if you can, if that's something you can work toward, is really going to be amazing, because it's going to release all of those feel-good hormones and help to process and break down stress hormones. So if it's within your capacity right now, if you're not feeling like, if it's too much, it's too much. But I would highly recommend you start going to either go for a walk, go to a yoga class, a Pilates class, whatever it is that brings in some movement. Number 8, supplements and blood screens. So we need to also consider what's happening on that kind of biological body level. Go get a blood panel done if you can, because you might be low in iron or low in things that actually are contributing to a real reason as well for you having low energy. And then supplements or things that really help for low mood. I'm not prescribing here, and I'm not able to know where you're at personally. So I would check with a naturopath, a nutritionist, or a doctor. But omega-3s, fatty acids, iron, zinc, B complex, vitamin D, 5-HTP, turmeric, ashwagandha, valerian, all of these things could be really useful. Some of us are genuinely lacking in something here that we need. Number 9 is repeated. Focus on what's within your control. Apologies. There are not 10 things, there are 9. Number 9, one step at a time. So just reminding yourself that the big picture is really overwhelming. So we're just taking small steps here. And often with freeze, it is just one little thing at a time, and it is going slowly. A reminder about your foundations, not spending much time here, but this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have to have our basic needs met before we can look at these higher things, right? So make sure, I'm flashing past this like it's not important. It's crucial and fundamental. How is your sleep? What are you eating? How is your nutrition? Are you moving your body? And you can see here that these aspects of safety, career, home, health, and then our needs at the very bottom here is the sleep and things like that. If they're not met, we're going to struggle when it comes to connection, family, friends, having self-esteem. So meet your basic needs. Dissociation can be common in freeze. This is where we kind of feel disconnected from our body, from ourself, from the environment around us, derealization, depersonalization. So we might feel numb and ungrounded, brain fog. So if this is something that you're experiencing, you're going to want to bring in grounding practices. So countdown to calm is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So if you're feeling dissociative in the moment, look around you. What are 5 things I can see? 4 things I can feel, 3 things I can hear, what are 2 things I could smell, 1 thing I could taste. You want to look at, in the moment of feeling spaced and dissociated, mindful breathing, so bringing yourself just back to observing the breath. Mindful mundane tasks. If you're unloading the dishwasher, if you're making a cup of tea, rather than being spaced out, or if you're thinking about stresses, but rather than dissociating from it, imagine that you've never ever made a cup of tea before, and imagine that you're writing a manual for it. Imagine you're writing a manual for unloading the dishwasher, or feel what everything feels like, the weight, the textures, what are you seeing? Somatic practices are going to bring you back to your body, and we've got some stuff to you'll do the release class as a part of this course. That'll be something you can do later. Tapping can bring you back into your body. So we could do bilateral stimulation, or we can just literally, and you might just do this with me now, just so you can actually get a sense of what it feels like. Just start tapping down your arms, hands, chest, tap your stomach, your legs, tap into your face. Just feel where your body is and feel what it feels like to make that connection. A little bit of movement. So we want to do body scans, and I'm going to send out a guided audio meditation that is going to lead you through a body scan. So you can pop in your headphones anytime and go through that. And also we want to start to learn how to describe what's happening in our body in order to reconnect. A lot of people find it really, really hard. If you ask what is it you're experiencing in your body right now? Or while you're thinking about that, while you're feeling that emotion, what's happening in your body? What are you noticing in this moment? That can be a really, really tricky thing to do. A lot of people don't know. So there's a little resource that I've got that comes along with this to give you some language, and you can do that through body scan. So you take your body scan and you begin just to tune in. So if I ask you right now, take a moment, take a breath, and just begin to notice what's happening in your body right now. Is there any area that's calling for your attention in this moment? Anywhere that you're feeling sensation more strongly? What sensations are you noticing? So just seeing if we were even in our bodies right now. Chances are we were probably in our heads. This is a very kind of head level, top level workshop at the moment. So were you even aware that you had a body? We aren't going to go through each of these. This slide is in here to be a resource for you. But it's to also explain to you the premise that when we are regulating the nervous system, there are these two ways of going about it: top down and bottom up. Top down are these cognitive resources, right? These are the coping statements, the thought challenges, the mindful approaches, the visualizations, the plans, the 555 tools. Bottom up is what you get as resources that come along with this as well. And that is using the body, the language of the nervous system, somatic work. And it's so important for any regulation to be using the body. In fact, crucial. And I think this is where talk therapies have missed in the past, but I think a lot of people are kind of realizing this now, is that remember we talked about that vagus nerve, which is like the vagal brake that helps us to come back to resilience. It's also a communication system between the body and the brain. And about 80% of that two-way highway is communicating from your body up to your brain. It's your body communicating the sense of safety, 80%. So we really have to use these techniques, these body-based techniques, to help us. So there's a list of little examples there. Just to clarify and explain the last one, sensory reduction, and what I mean there, freeze can come about because of total overload, too much going on for too long. And so sensory reduction is kind of what freeze craves, and we can feed that and allow it that. We could block out all of our visual input with a wheat bag on our eyes. We could take the lights really low in the evening so everything's not going. We could have noise cancelling headphones. We could book ourselves in for a float tank. Proprioceptive, I just want to clarify that one too, actually, point number 3. Proprioception is about knowing where your body is in space, and proprioceptive input is pressure and deep types of deep pressure that many people find extremely calming, and it's also really helpful to connect you back to your body. And so the burrito wrap is getting a blanket, wrapping it tightly around yourself, a weighted breath, so lying on your back and putting something heavy on your belly like a couple of books, and breathing so that you're raising the books up and down. Weighted blanket. Massage is so healing for depression, and there's research around massage. So I think that's probably clarified enough. Anything on there, let me know if there's any questions. But we do really need to incorporate these body and bottom-up processes. I don't want you to get caught up in this notion of up-regulation or down-regulation. So you would have heard me say this before. When we're stressed and hyper-aroused, we are down-regulating. When we're hypo-aroused, stuck and frozen, we want to up-regulate, bring energy back in. But we don't need to get too caught up in this, because many of us are in that blended state of both. So we kind of need both. So we just want to do overarching, soothing, balancing things for our nervous system. And a lot of them do both anyway. This is a quick note on something that is really connected to ventral vagal. So joy, creativity, play, and fun are ventral vagal aspects, right? When we feel good and safe. And we find it really, really hard to access our sympathetic nervous system. To access those things when we're in sympathetic or dorsal. We just can't get there. So it might feel a little bit like the last thing you want to do. So there's a bit of opposite action here, but we can actually use play and creativity and fun to help us come back to ventral vagal. And so fun scheduling sounds like the most counterintuitive oxymoron ever, scheduling fun, but you can schedule in times to do something that feels a little bit lighter. So block a time out in your diary and write in, I'm going to do art or painting, or I'm going to do movement of some sort that isn't a class. I'm just going to put on some funky music and dance. Yesterday, I had to go to my nan's house yesterday. And so instead of driving, I took my scooter. I scooted by myself. Usually I only have a scooter if I'm scooting alongside my daughter on a bike. I just scooted there and I felt like a big kid and I felt so free. So how often do you do things in your life that are free and fun and playful? And of course, you probably don't do them very often if you're in freeze, but can you? Could you make some time and space to connect with that? Just a question. Could you please explain what it means to complete the stress response? So what that means is when you're in fight or flight mode, your body has a natural response it's wanting to do, right? So if you're really angry, it naturally might want to be fighting. If you're really anxious, it might want to be shaking or running away. And so completing the stress response is allowing your body to kind of mobilize some of that energy, because most of the time what we do is hold that in, hold in our anger, hold in our fear. And so it gets stuck in the body. And so for anger, if you're really struggling with anger, that might look like I pick up a pillow and throw it down onto the ground, pick it up, throw it down, pick it up, throw it down, or I go and like punch a punching bag, or push into a wall, or scream into a pillow. For anxiety, it might be body shake. So I stand and shake your whole body for like 1 to 5 minutes, or go for a run or a walk. That is completing the stress response. So it's actually allowing it to happen in ways that we're doing on purpose. So it's not like it's reactive or unproductive. It's mobilizing that energy. And actually we can do that with freeze too, because freeze wants us to collapse, right, and be immobile. But many of us just keep pushing ourselves. The body's saying, I am absolutely at capacity and I need to collapse. And we keep working. Or we like want to sit on the couch at the end of the day, or we just feel guilty. And so we make ourselves do something, or we just watch Netflix. And that's actually it's not a thought out completion of a response. It's stuck right in freeze. So it might be allowing yourself to curl up in the fetal position, or go into child's pose, or shut the sensory elements out, or take a nap, and removing any layers of judgment and guilt and allowing the body to do that. So this is, we're not doing a somatic practice today. I'm going to get you to have a look at a couple of things, but your somatic practice is included in the release class. There's a 35-minute guided somatic practice. So somatic practices mobilize stuck energy, and they can up-regulate us, or they can down-regulate us too. What we're paying attention somatically to in freeze is our posture, for one. What does your posture do in a freeze state? Vocalization. What does your voice do? Do you feel like you lose the ability to speak at all? Does the tone change and go quiet? Do you lack confidence? Does your body shut down with that, collapsing? So just feeling into and connecting with the body, leaning into that freeze and stillness. We do this in the beginning of the guided practice, and then bringing in some slow movement. So what you'll get to try is the body scan guided audio. We could try it right now with your posture. What does it feel like to sit up straight, to lengthen through the spine, to have the shoulders back, to have the chin up? What does it feel like just for a second to look around the room? You've probably been staring at me and the screen. What does it feel like to connect back to your environment? You could try a little safe hug. So taking your left hand under your right armpit, your right hand over top. When you're feeling really frozen and stuck, you can come to this. Breathe into the space. Be here for 1, 2, 3 minutes and see what happens. Become aware of the body, tune in, notice. Body pats we did before. They are a great way to bring you back to your body and bring energy back in. The shakes I talked about before is really, really great for mobilizing you in freeze. And texture touch is another lovely one. So if you're feeling slumped and stuck, stand up and go and touch as many different textures in the space that you're in. Just coming back to your environment, coming back to your body. A question here: are somatic practices best used as a practice, like doing a practice daily, or in response to an event, for instance, of freeze, or both? So the answer is both. The longer answer, but I won't take too long because I know we've been here a while, is practice in the calm to access in the chaos, is what I always say. You need to start establishing those neural connections in your brain. So if you only ever try to use a somatic practice or any practice or tool in the moment in response to something, so I'm feeling really anxious or angry or depressed, I want a tool now to fix it, that's not the best way to use them, because A, we don't want to come in with something constantly trying to resist, fix, stop. We want to come in to regulate, and maybe sometimes we want to come in to be with that feeling. So we've also got to set up that baseline, because we're not going to get access to that tool when we're dysregulated. Remember, the brain, when the lid is flipped, we're not going to have access to those logical thoughts to bring in that tool. So every day a practice, and that could be very minor, and it could be just a few coping statements here, a little gratitude practice there, a little body practice there. We are almost there, team. In fact, we're pretty much done. So well done for hanging in there. This is a resource that's coming out to you. This is my somatic vocabulary resource. There is a heap of descriptive words there. So have this in front of you when you do your body scan. And as you're sensing in, what am I feeling in this moment? You can look at that list and have a think. You know, there's lots of amazing words there. Heavy, hollow, tight, locked, stringy. Like how often do we use these words to describe our state? All right, we are pretty much done. So I'm just going to kind of close things a little bit here to just let you know what's next for you. So these are your resource takeaways. Whatever you've seen today is coming out as a proper handout for you. You got all the posters. You've got the release class. So when you are ready, you probably don't want to do it now because you've been here for, 2.25 hours, but you're going to do the release class. Take yourself through the full somatic practice, 35 minutes of it. You've got some guided meditations coming out to you, and a page you can see there, the top one, of journal prompts, that if you like doing that, you can explore a little further. And so your next steps is to do that class. If you're in the membership, there is a lot of practices in the members library, lots of somatic grounding for dissociation, for low mood. So get into those, and they're all bite-sized. There's going to be an additional class coming to membership as well, of a yin and breathwork fusion. That's going to be beautiful for freeze. So you've got your journal prompts and you've got your guided meditations. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. I'll be here for just a moment. Thank you for those on replay. Thank you for those who have come here. It is amazing. Remember, you're only going to remember about 20% or less. So right now, what I encourage you to do is to write down your key aha moments and to think about what is one thing you could do today that would cement some of this or be helpful or would be one of the practices. So well done for showing up for you. And I'm sending you big love and warm fuzzies.